Good evening and welcome to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Hamsa Shrikant and I'm one of the 2 Athenaeum Fellows this year. First off, I just want to say, standing here, it's so nice to see a full house tonight. I hope you all continue to come to the Athenaeum and be a part of experiences like this one. So, when I was 13 years old, I liked only 2 things: listening to angsty pop music and reading murder mystery novels. Agatha Christie was undoubtedly the queen of crime, and I loved reading about the dramatic turns, the accusations that the butler did it, and the wrongful convictions. I would keep my eyes glued to the pages of the book, desperately trying to guess the murderer. Spoiler alert, it was the butler. Amidst the theater and the excitement of it all, it was so easy to forget that these events could very well happen in the real world, to real people with complex lives who suffer the consequences of an interesting plot twist. In early 2000s, Adnan Syed was convicted and sentenced to life plus 30 years for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Heyman Lee, a high school senior in Baltimore, Maryland. Syed has maintained his innocence, and his family friend, Rabia Chaudry, has always believed him. Rabia Chaudry is an attorney, podcaster, and recent Jennings Randolph Senior Fellow at the United States Institute of Peace, where she researched the intersection of religion and violent extremism. She's the co-host and co-producer of the hit criminal justice podcast, Undisclosed, with nearly 250 million downloads, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Adnan's Story. She's the co-producer and co-host of the weekly podcast, The 45th, which examines the politics and policies of the Trump administration. Prior to her work with USIP, Chaudry served as an international security fellow at the New America Foundation, where she led a countering violent extremism community project in partnership with Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Her work at New America Foundation focused on the empowerment of American Muslim communities in social media advocacy. Chaudry is also the founder of Safe Nation Collaborative, a training firm that specializes in CVE, which is countering violent extremism training. Chaudry is a fellow of the Truman National Security Project, a fellow of the American Muslim Civic Leadership Institute, and a fellow at Shalom Hartman Institute. She's a frequent writer and public speaker on issues of social and criminal justice, faith, gender, and national security. She's the recipient of the Truman National Security Project's 2015 Harry S. Truman Award for Communications and Media Influence, a 2015 Carnegie Corporation Great Immigrant, and the recipient of the 2015 Healing and Hope Award by the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. Chaudry received her JD from George Mason School of Law and practiced immigration and civil rights law for over a decade before moving into CVE policy sphere. Ms. Chaudry's Athenaeum presentation is co-sponsored by the Center for Writing and Public Discourse and the Gould Center for Humanistic Studies, both at CMC. This is a 45-minute presentation, and there will be a Q&A at the end. As always, I must remind you that audiovisual recording is strictly prohibited. Please use this opportunity to put away your devices, stuff your face with bread, and adjust your seat if you have not already done so. And without further delay, please join me in welcoming our speaker tonight, Ms. Rabia Chaudry.
Hi and good evening, Claremont, McKenna. Thank you for that fantastic introduction. Sometimes I listen to these and I think, did I do all that, really? I feel really tired listening to that. Well, it's such a pleasure and honor to be here. I have never been to Claremont, McKenna, or Claremont at all before, and it's such a beautiful place, and I'm so glad the rain went away for me. I got to hike a mountain. I'm going to sleep great tonight. Had a wonderful meal. Now, before I start my talk tonight, I want to just mention something that I've heard in so many talks about, how to give a talk, and that's like audiences only remember the first thing and the last thing you say. They don't remember anything in the middle. So I want to start off by saying this. Adnan Syed is innocent, and Adnan Syed was wrongfully convicted of a crime he didn't commit. So having said that, that's the first thing. You're going to hear it one more time tonight before this is over. I want to ask a couple of questions. How many people here listen to Serial? Oh my Lord. Okay, hands down. How many people did not listen to Serial? That's a better question. Okay. Now, the people who listen to Serial, how many people listen to Undisclosed? Ah, this is the kind of room I love. It means you guys don't even know what you don't know. It's good, it's good. I have a lot to tell you. But I'm gonna start by leveling the playing field so that we're all on the same page and we understand what this story is even about. Now, every wrongful conviction starts with a crime. Sometimes that crime is murder, and in this story, that's what it is. So I want to talk about January 13th, 1999. And that's the day that Haymon Lee, an 18-year-old senior at Woodlawn High School in the suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland, went to school that day, left school, was expected to go to work that evening, and she disappeared. What we know about her is that she left school sometime between 2 and 2:15 p.m. That's what we believe. A number of students said they think they saw her leave around that time. The problem is the police didn't talk to students or anybody at the school for 6 weeks until after she had disappeared. And every day, Haymon picked up her young cousin from a local elementary school at 3 p.m. But that day, she didn't pick her up, and that child waited and waited. By 5 o'clock, the family realized something is wrong, because Haymon Lee was an incredibly responsible young woman. She was athletic. She was an academic achiever. You know, she worked while she went to high school, and she was just a highly responsible young woman. She had a pager. They paged her. They didn't hear anything back, and they got worried, so they called the police, really within a matter of hours. By around 5:30 that evening, the police showed up. They took a police report, and they started looking for her. Hay had a car. They couldn't find her car. They knew that Hay had a boyfriend at the time. She worked at Lens Crafters, and she was dating a man named Don, who also worked at Lens Crafters. So they even put out APBs or whatever, some police alerts to the area that Don lived in, thinking maybe she was there. But they didn't find her. Now this happened, like I said, on January 13th, 1999, and it just so happened that there was a snowstorm that night. And for the next 2 days, school was closed. So the kids who went to school with her, remember, this is not the time of social media. Nobody's posting on Facebook or Twitter. Anybody seen Haymon Lee? Her parents, her mother and brother made a couple of calls to some of the friends, and they're like, no, we haven't heard from her. But they also knew this was like a couple of months before they're gonna graduate. And she might be with her new boyfriend, who she was crazy about, and kids kind of dip out the last year. They're not as focused and easy to keep track of that last couple of months of senior year. So nobody took it seriously. Thursday came, Friday came, schools closed, the weekend came. It wasn't until Monday and all the kids went back to school that they were like, where's Haymon Lee? They still didn't know where she was. So for a good 4 days, people didn't realize at the school that she was actually missing, that her family was still looking for her, that the police were looking for her. They didn't realize this. Haymon Lee's body was found about 6 weeks later. It was found in a park just a few miles away from the school. It was buried hastily. I think it's fair to say her body was dumped. It was not a ceremonial burial. She had been strangled. There was no evidence of a sexual assault at the time, although her clothing was rearranged in a way to suggest there might have been. Her car was not there. Her purse was not there. Her pager was not there. It was just her body. So now the police had to make an arrest. They had to figure out what happened to her. Now, Haymon Lee's body was found on February 9th, 1999. But on February 4th, 5 days before her body was found, the police had already started looking at a suspect. And that suspect was Adnan Syed. Adnan was also a 17-year-old high school senior, and him and Haymon Lee had dated for 6 months the previous year. They had gone to junior prom the previous year together. They were like a cute little romantic couple. They were crazy about each other, both good-looking, high-achieving, the toast of the high school. And then they broke up. And he was seeing other people. She had a new boyfriend. But they started looking at Adnan because at that point, when it was a missing persons investigation, the family brought in a special investigator, a woman who was a local cultural consultant. And this is not information we knew for about 15 years. We did not know this person existed in this case. And this woman wrote a memo in 1999 in which she said, as a cultural expert on Muslim culture, because Adnan was an American Muslim boy, that Muslim men are prone to violence against women, that this looked like maybe something that was like an honor killing type of situation. So there's a 12-page memo all about Muslim culture. Adnan, at one point when they were dating, had given as a gift a scarf to Hayman. And in that memo, this lady had written, when a Muslim man gives a woman a scarf, that's a sign that he owns her. Now I'm a Muslim. That is not a thing. It's not a thing. But that is the thing that the police and the prosecution began relying on, and they said, this is our suspect. Now, this is very common in wrongful conviction cases, that the police very early on have tunnel vision on one suspect to the exclusion of others. But let's talk a little bit more about the suspect. How do I know Adnan? Like I said, Adnan was 17 at the time, but I've known Adnan since he was 13 years old. Adnan is my younger brother's best friend. Adnan, my younger brother is 6 years younger than me, and when Adnan was in high school that year, and when he was eventually arrested 6 weeks after her body was found, I was in law school. And I was a married woman. I had a daughter. I had an infant. I lived in Northern Virginia. This all happened in Baltimore, Maryland, an hour away. But I used to visit my parents every weekend. I'd spent the weekends with them, bring my daughter. They loved to be around their granddaughter. And for 6 weeks, I would watch the local news, and the news would say, local girl missing, local girl missing. And then, Hayman Lee's body is found. And I was like, oh, this is terrible. And then one day, I'm sitting on my parents' couch, and all of a sudden, news report, a suspect has been arrested in the murder of Hayman Lee. His name is Adnan Syed. And a picture of Adnan comes up. And I sat up, shot up out of the sofa. I'm like, what is Adnan's picture doing on the television? Because I know Adnan, and I know his parents because they live a couple streets down the street, or down the neighborhood from my parents. And it was shocking. And there's still footage on YouTube. It's terrible footage of me, but terrible footage of me and my mother going to Adnan's house that evening, trying to talk to his parents to see if there's anything we could do. He had been taken out of bed at 5 a.m. and arrested for her murder. We didn't know what was going on. And in our community, in that local Baltimore community, there was a mosque right down the street from Adnan's home. His parents were very kind of conservative, culturally conservative Muslims, but also extremely simple people. They didn't have a television at home. They just kind of raised their sons at the mosque. They had 3 sons. Adnan was the middle child. He was kind of the favorite, the golden child. He was the best looking. He was very charismatic, really sweet kid, really good in school, wanted to go to med school. He was like junior prom king, blah, 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 all that stuff. What they didn't know was that Adnan was also a very healthy, red-blooded American teenager who was dating, sleeping around, smoking pot, drinking, and going to parties. And the fact that he was doing those things without his parents' knowledge, which, surprise, it should never be a shock that teenagers are doing things without their parents' knowledge. But that was actually used as evidence against him in the court of law, that he was leading a double life, that he was leading a nefarious double life. And I remember in our community when that was first said in court at his bail hearing, it kind of sent a shockwave through the community because all the other kids were like, wait a minute, that's us too, though. Like, we're all kind of doing that. And I can tell you, like, every South Asian kid is doing that. I'm just telling you right now. South Asian parents, I'm sorry, it's true. So what was the evidence against Adnan? Well, the evidence was one thing. It was a witness. His name was Jay Wilds. He was a state's witness who said to the police that Adnan killed Hayman Lee after school that day because she broke up with him, and that he then called Jay and said, meet me at the Best Buy. We all remember the Best Buy. Meet me at the Best Buy. That he opened up the trunk of his car and showed him the body and then said, help me bury her. But instead of burying her, they parked the car somewhere. Adnan had to go back to school because he had track practice, because when you've killed somebody, that's really priority. And he went back to track practice, and after track practice, Jay picked him back up, and they went and buried her in Lincoln Park, where her body was found. This was Jay's story. So their evidence is a witness. They conducted forensics, according to Jay's story, because Jay said that Adnan had her body in the trunk of his car. They said that Adnan was in Lincoln Park. It's not like a pretty park. These are the woods. You say Lincoln Park, they're woods. It takes effort to get in and out of Lincoln Park. And the way her body was found was also very suspicious and troubling, because there's a man who said he went into the park 120 feet to take a leak. When he pulled over on the opposite side of the road, that he just happened to see her body. When the city surveyor went to go look with the police to find her, he said he was standing on top of the body and couldn't see it. There's a lot of questions about how that man found that body. And that man also failed a polygraph. But that man was very quickly eliminated because, again, even before the body was found, the police had their suspect. So they did all the forensics. There was a couple of hairs found on Heyman Lee's body. So they tested it against Adnan. They tested it against Jay, African-American man. Jay, by the way, was 19 years old. He knew these kids because he had gone to Woodlawn High School with them and graduated the year earlier. And he supplied them pot. The hair didn't match Heyman Lee, it didn't match Adnan, it didn't match Jay. They took all of Adnan's clothing, they tore up his car, they went to his house, they got the carpets. They didn't find a single soil sample that matched Lincoln Park. They tore the lining of his trunk out, no body fluids. There was no evidence, there was not a single bit of forensic evidence tying Adnan to the crime, which another way to think about it, because it's all about framing, is that all the forensics excluded Adnan. When her car was finally found, there were 16 sets of fingerprints in that car that the police never determined who they belonged to because they didn't match Adnan, they didn't match Jay, and they didn't match the victim, Hay. What the police didn't do was say, well, we've got this hair and we've got these fingerprints, maybe we should check and see if they match anybody else. Maybe we should take hair samples and fingerprint her actual boyfriend. Or maybe somebody else she worked with, or somebody she went to school with, or somebody in her family, or somebody she was chatting online with, or anything. So you've got a victim who's got these hairs on her body and fingerprints in her car that don't match anybody, and they proceed with the prosecution. Adnan was convicted. There were 2 trials. The first trial happened towards the end of 1999 in December. And I was, again, in law school. I was taking my final exams, and I could not attend. And one of the things we have to understand when we think about the criminal justice system, yeah, these are public proceedings. Who shows up? Who gives up work in school to sit in a courtroom during the daytime? Nobody. Most courtrooms are empty when you go there. It can be a serious case where somebody might be facing the death penalty, and there might be nobody in that courtroom watching what's happening, okay? This is true for criminal proceedings, it's true for immigration proceedings, and everything in between. The second trial, that trial ended in a mistrial. It ended in a mistrial because his lawyer committed some misconduct in the courtroom. And the judge called her a liar, it didn't go well, called a mistrial, end of that. They were just a few days into the trial. The second trial was just a few months later, or a month later, and I happened to be on break from school, so I was able to attend that trial. And the trial lasted, I actually can't remember how long it lasted a few weeks. But about 90% of the trial was the prosecution putting on their case. The defense counsel put on a case for about 3 days, 2.5, 3 days. The jury was out. I remember the day that they gave the closing arguments. I was there, and the judge dismissed the jury to begin their deliberations. And it was early in the morning. It was around 10 or 11, if I'm remembering correctly. And I thought, okay, let's go grab some lunch. It's a Friday. Let's go grab some lunch, and I guess we're just gonna go home because we'll hear from them like in Monday or Tuesday or whenever they're done deliberating. We were still thinking about where we were gonna go for lunch when it was about 2 hours later. Well, I had gone for a walk first, and other people were trying to come and meet me in the city for lunch when I got a call saying that the jury is ready to return their verdict. This is like in 2.5 hours. In a murder case with a life sentence. So I thought, this can only be an acquittal. There's no way they can convict a juvenile of murder in 2.5 hours when you have weeks and weeks of evidence and testimony to deliberate over. Anyhow, we go back, and Adnan was convicted on all charges. And the charge, and this is another way the system works, prosecutors don't just charge with one charge. They'll add everything they can. They'll throw the kitchen sink at the defendant. So you had murder, you had kidnapping, because they said that Adnan somewhere intervened, found Heyman Lee, they don't know where, and took off with her, and then he killed her. So kidnapping, theft, because her purse was missing, her car keys were missing, her pager was missing, all of these things. Now, Adnan was convicted for two reasons. The first was incompetence. And when I sat in that trial, and I, again, was a law student, I could not understand what I was seeing. Adnan's trial counsel, his defense attorney, was a very highly celebrated woman named Cristina Gutierrez, who had like a 30, 40-year career in Baltimore as one of the best criminal defense attorneys. But what I saw was a woman who was incoherent, rambling, angry, and just I didn't understand what was going on. I saw people in the jury asleep. There were times when she wouldn't finish a sentence. There were times when she would repeat the same sentence over and over and over. And I kept looking around thinking, and here's the thing, I was in that courtroom because I didn't have classes during those few weeks. Behind me were just elders from our community who didn't even understand what was going on, you know? And all those elders looked like people, men with beards and women wearing scarves like me, and then you have a jury from Baltimore City that is not a jury of Adnan's peers in any way, shape, or form. They don't know our community. All they see is what they're seeing visually, right? But Adnan's religion and his ethnicity were mentioned 270 times in the trial in a murder case. Now, I would say that that's unconstitutional. I would say that is abhorrent. I would say that is unethical and immoral to do that to a 17-year-old juvenile, to use his religion against him. Some of the questions the prosecutor asked, he called in a witness, one of Adnan's friends from the mosque, and asked him really weird questions. How many times a day do you pray? What direction do you pray in? Do women pray behind you or next to you? How do you fold your hands when you pray? Like, what are you doing? What was the purpose of these? I'll tell you what the purpose of these were. It was to alienate our community. It was to make us seem like we are so weird. And you know, years later, when Sarah Koenig, who created Serial, went and spoke to some jury members, they said, yeah, that was kind of an issue. The religion thing was kind of an issue because these Arab guys are not so great to their women. So the incompetence here was that his lawyer did not challenge any of these 270 times. In fact, many of the times she brought him up herself. And fear. Fear was the other reason he was convicted, and that is because of the religious issue. Now, the other reason incompetence came into play was this. Adnan's lawyer, shortly after his trial, in about a year or two after his trial, was disbarred, and then she died. We did not know at the time of his trial that she was handling 9 murder cases at the same time, which is unheard of, even for the most competent attorney at the top of their game. That she had a cognitive disability, that she had muscular dystrophy, that she had multiple sclerosis. Some people said she might have had cancer at the time, that she might have been on drugs. There was a time when she asked Adnan's parents for $10,000 in a paper bag. Lawyers don't do that. Shouldn't be doing that. And they gave it to her. Something was very wrong. But she was disbarred, not because of Adnan's case. Adnan tried to file a complaint against her, and it was rejected because he wasn't able to show like the receipts of all the payments. The complaint he was filing was that we paid her to do things she didn't do. For example, I was there in her office when his parents wrote a check for $5,000 to bus the jury to the crime scene, and she never did it. But he wasn't able to provide the evidence, so his complaint was rejected. However, 40 other complaints against Cristina Gutierrez got her disbarred. She broke the record for attorney grievances in the state of Maryland, and that record has never since been broken. She holds that record. There is an attorney grievance commission fund that pays victims. She bankrupted it. That's how many people they had to pay out. These are things, by the way, I don't think Serial talked about. So Adnan was in the hands of somebody who was on her last legs, and then, like I said, she died because she was that sick. So then what? What are you stuck with? You're stuck with appeals. And I can tell you this, once you've been convicted in this country, your chances of winning an appeal are maybe 1%, 2%, 3%. That's it. So we began the appellate process, and if you know anything about the law, you'll understand that you can't just go to an appeal, the appellate court, and say, I want to try this issue again, I want to try this case again, or I want to try this fact again, and this witness, I want to bring this witness. You're not even allowed to bring new evidence. You could find evidence. You could find a videotape of somebody else committing that crime, and you cannot raise it in appeal. What you can raise are technical issues in the trial. Like the judge made incorrect legal rulings, the lawyer made a technical mistake. Anyhow, we tried it. Didn't work. First appeal lost, second appeal lost, third appeal lost. The years are rolling by. The years are rolling by. But here's the thing. I had a piece of new evidence that I was holding because we couldn't use it yet. But I was holding it pretty much from the day that Adnan was convicted, because the day he was convicted, I went to see him in the prison, in the holding cell in the city. And I said to Adnan, I said, the prosecution says, they said it in their closing arguments, that Heyman Lee left school around 2 o'clock and she was dead by 2:36 p.m. All you had to do was account for 30 minutes of your time after school. That's it. And Adnan said, they arrested me like 2 months later, 2.5 months later. He's like, all I know is every day my routine was the same. I'd finish classes, I'd hang out until track practice at the school, I'd go to the library sometimes I'd do my homework, I'd just hang out until track practice at 3 o'clock. So there's an hour there. And then he goes, but there was this girl who wrote me these letters when I first got arrested a year ago. And she said she remembered being with me in the library that day for very specific reasons. I said, well, I never heard of her. How come she wasn't at trial? He said, well, I gave the letters to my lawyer. Again, very, very sick Christina Gutierrez. And the lawyer came back to me and said, I checked her dates out and she had her dates wrong. He's like, so that's the end of that. He's like, that's the only possible person who might have accounted for my time. I said, give me her name, give me her number, I'm gonna contact her. So a couple of weeks after his conviction, I contacted Asia McClain and I went to see her. And Asia said, I wrote those letters over a year ago because I remember being at the library. I remember why it was that day. I remember my boyfriend coming to pick me up and being angry that I was talking to Adnan. I remember being stuck in a snowstorm that night. I remember school being closed the next 2 days. Everything she told me, I went and verified to see, was school really closed that day? Was there a snowstorm? I was able to independently verify the things that she remembered. And then I said, well, why didn't you appear at trial? She said, well, nobody ever contacted me. So Adnan's lawyer had an alibi in her hand, and she never contacted that alibi. And in all those appeals down the road, we could not raise it because that's considered new evidence. We had to wait for something called post-conviction. 10 years down. So 10 years have passed. What am I doing? Now I'm going to take a step back and tell you about what I'm doing with my life in the meantime. In the meantime, like I said, I had been in law school when Adnan was arrested. I went on to graduate from law school shortly after 9/11. And while I wanted to be a corporate attorney while I was in law school, the demands of our community after 9/11 drastically changed. Suddenly, we needed civil rights lawyers. We needed lawyers working with law enforcement. We needed all kinds of people in national security. And, I was a lawyer at a time when everybody in our community was going to medical school or engineering school, and so I was like a failed doctor, basically. My parents were like, what is she doing? We're so humiliated that she's going to law school. That's actually true. It wasn't until after 9/11 they're like, well, maybe it's important work. And so I became, while I had been working in immigration, suddenly the nexus of immigration and civil rights became very clear because immigrants were being targeted, immigration policies were being used to enforce national security policies, and so I began working on these issues, but I also became kind of an advocate in the Muslim community. I began writing, speaking, doing trainings, doing all kinds of things. Again, the appeals are going forward. Well, we're finally ready for the post-conviction appeal, and we're like, we need to bring Asia to court. We're gonna present this witness, finally, who's gonna say, I was with him at the time the victim was killed. Literally, I was literally with him at the time the victim was killed. We send a private investigator to find Asia McClain, who is the alibi witness. And Asia McClain tells our private investigator, I'm not coming. I will not testify for Adnan. And we didn't know what happened. It was like a punch to the face. We had waited about 12 years for this. So we went to the hearing. I testified and I said, well, I met with Asia. These are the documents she gave. She gave me an affidavit and she wrote these letters to Adnan. The judge is like, why isn't the witness here? And you know what happened? The original prosecutor of the case from 13 years prior gets on the stand on behalf of the state and he says, well, the witness called me. The witness called me because this private investigator visited her and said, come testify. And that witness told me that she wrote those documents because she had been under duress and pressure by the family and by me. And I was sitting in that courtroom thinking, that is a lie. That's a complete and utter lie. And it was shocking to my system because I didn't know what was happening. But in that one blow, it was over. I was like, that's it, we're gonna lose this case. Now, whenever you have a hearing, it takes like months and months to get like an actual ruling from a judge. But we left depressed. I was like, a prosecutor just got on the stand and said the only alibi witness he had made those claims under duress from the family. He's not gonna believe us. So then I started thinking, what are we gonna do? And for years I had thought, maybe we need to go to the media, because I'd watched Dateline in 2020, and I'm like, we need other investigators. And I watched a documentary that night, not that night, but a few weeks later. I was watching this documentary on Netflix called West of Memphis. How many people are familiar with the West Memphis case? I really urge you to take a look at this case. There's been like 4 or 5 documentaries made about this brutal murder of 3 little boys, a triple homicide in which 3 teenagers were convicted. What you're gonna find is every single documentary that was made, every one you watch, you're gonna be like, oh no, it was that person. Oh no, it was that person. Oh no. It will completely shift your understanding of the case. And when I watched this very final documentary, I think the 4th or the 5th in all the documentaries made on the case called West of Memphis, I suddenly was like, it's all about how you tell the story, right? And about who's covering the story and what they find. We have to get media involved. I turned off the documentary and I said, I'm gonna find a journalist who maybe wrote about Adnan's case back in 1999, and this is again 2013. And the very first name that came up was Sarah Koenig. Sarah Koenig worked for the Baltimore Sun. She hadn't written about Adnan's case, but she had written about Adnan's lawyer being disbarred. And I thought, well, I'm just gonna find her, wherever she is, and she happened to be a producer at NPR, or This American Life, excuse me. So I shot her an email and I said, well, look, here's the deal. There's this case that happened, and you covered the story about the lawyer, and you might be interested, and whatever. I just think somebody should look into it. And the next day, or a day or two later, I got a response saying, okay, well, let's just talk about it on the phone. And we talked a little bit, and a week later, she came to see me. And when you hear Serial, in the very first episode, what you hear is me talking and my brother talking. That was the very first time we met Sarah Koenig, and we started telling her about the case. And she was immediately hooked. Now, she spent 10 months, 10, 11 months investigating the case. And as she investigated, I didn't know what she was I didn't know what she was finding. I just kind of worked as a fixer. You need to talk to that person in the community, I'll connect you here. You need these documents, I'll get them for you here. Whatever you need, I'll give to you. I didn't know what she was finding. I didn't know what she was gonna create. What I thought was gonna happen was, at the end of all of this will be a 1-hour This American Life episode about the case, maybe. But I also didn't care, because it wasn't about the final product. What I wanted to know is, did she find the smoking gun? Did she get a witness to talk? Did she find new evidence that's gonna get Adnan back in court? Now, I have to say this. I actually convinced Sarah Koenig before I convinced Adnan, his lawyer. I did this without their permission. Most criminal defense lawyers will never let a journalist close to a client. They just don't do it. It doesn't happen. They won't even let their clients testify in court, even if they're innocent. So it would have been a very hard sell, except for the fact that his lawyer, who had been working with us, a very great, wonderful lawyer, who'd been working with us for about 6 years at the time, said, I'm kind of done with this case anyways. We're losing the post-conviction. There's nothing else I can do. It's over. Do whatever you want. And Adnan said okay, because he just wanted to get me off his back. He was like, this journalist is not going to find anything. Nothing's going to come of this. Rabia has worked so hard. I just want to make her happy. So at the end of 10 months, in August of 2014, Sarah Koenig calls me and said, we're turning this into a 10 or 12 part, we're turning this into a podcast, 12 parts. And I said, what is a podcast? I don't know what a podcast is. I had no idea what a podcast was. And she's like, well, it's a series of internet shows. And I'm like, internet shows? Who's gonna listen to an internet show? And at this point, 10, 12 months in, again, no evidence, nothing new, other than what she was able to do was she was able to talk to Asia McLean, that alibi witness, and tell her that, you didn't show up in court, so this is what the prosecutor said. And Asia said to her, that's a lie. I never made those statements under duress. I did not write those documents under duress. And the prosecutor actually had spoken to me. She said, when the private investigator came to me from Adnan's team to ask me to come testify, she said, all I could think was, this convicted killer has found me, like across the country. She lives like across the country. She's like, he found me, he knows where I live, and now he wants me to come help him get him out of prison. So she's like, I called the prosecutor from the case, and I said, why was Adnan convicted? And the prosecutor told her, he was convicted on the basis of DNA evidence, incontrovertible evidence. He's looking for a loophole to get out. Don't help him. The prosecutor tampered with this witness. She believed him, and that same man then got on the stand and told the judge that this witness told me she had been forced to make those documents. So Sarah Koenig was able to solve that mystery for us, and we thought, okay, how are we going to use this to get back in court? We got to figure that out. Now, when Serial happened, it was an overnight sensation. I don't know if you guys remember, the first couple of weeks, they dropped 2 episodes each week. I had a blog at the time. I was blogging. I still have a blog, but I haven't blogged in a while. And again, I didn't know what they were going to talk about, but what I decided to do was, as every episode dropped, I would write a blog about it. Now, this really upset the Serial team. They did not want me inserting myself, but I said, well, I'm not going to like preempt anything you're going to say. I'm just going to respond to your episode and fill in some context. And that was kind of like me trying to take that power back and balance the narrative a bit. But the other thing I was doing was this. Because I had worked for about 10 years in American Muslim advocacy, I had worked with New America Foundation, I'd worked with Google, Facebook, Twitter on social media advocacy, I was like, I know how to do this. I can turn this into a thing on social media. So I created the hashtag #FreeAdnan. And I began tweeting it, and I began people asked me later, did you have a social media team? I'm like, no, it was me and my smartphone on the toilet. That was it. It was just me tweeting in my sleep. It was just me on that phone, constantly doing it. And the attention that Serial attracted was incredible. It was a global phenomenon. I think I gave interviews to Radio Ireland like 4 times. I don't know why Ireland's obsessed with this case, but they love it. I interviewed with CNN India. Australia has one of the highest listenerships. It was crazy. But what Serial also did was this. It brought resources to the case. Suddenly other lawyers, investigators, people who had some kind of forensic background were reaching out to us and saying, hey, you need some help? Hey, maybe I can help you here. Hey, I think these are some discrepancies. And I had begun on my blog uploading case documents. I was like, have at it. Just look at the documents. And I'm not a criminal investigator. I don't know how to do this. I need help. People help me. And there were 2 lawyers whose blogs I began reading, Susan Simpson and Colin Miller, because I'm like, they're reading these documents and they're seeing things I've never seen before. And I began reading their blogs. And they were astonishing. Susan Simpson wrote a 40-page blog on cell phone tower pings. I'm not kidding. But what she did in that blog was she broke down how the state's witness, his testimony actually didn't match the cell phone tower evidence at all. But Serial said it did. So Serial did a lot of great things, but what Serial was unable to do was actually conduct a real legal investigation of the case. They got some things wrong. Okay, it happens. Some things and I got in arguments with them about. I'll give you an example. They did one episode in which they talked about the police involved in this case. Now, having done now about 12, 13 other wrongful conviction cases since Serial, that's become the bulk of my work, you see patterns. If you're looking at cases from Philadelphia, it'll be the same 3 cops that pop up in every case over and over. There are patterns of misconduct. It's always a few bad apples that just mess up the whole basket. And I said to Sarah, the cops in Adnan's case have been cited in other cases for coercing witnesses. There have been people exonerated and sued these same cops for false prosecution and for like contriving evidence. I said, you should mention that. These are active cases. Mention that in the podcast. But she was like, no, in the podcast it was like they were basically good guys just doing their work. That's not true. I'm not saying they're not good guys. I'm saying they weren't doing their jobs. And since then, there's at least 5 cases I can name out of Baltimore from the same era that involve the same cops in which 3 men have already been exonerated because they use the same kind of tactics. What Serial didn't do was talk about the most important piece of evidence in a case where you don't have real forensic evidence, and that's the body. An autopsy can tell you a lot about a crime, a lot about a homicide. It can tell you how that person was killed. It can tell you how long they've been dead. It can tell you if the body's been moved. And when you have 12 episodes on a murder case, that's a mystery, because that's what people loved about Serial, right? The mystery. Did he do it? Didn't he do it? Is he a great guy? I mean, the choices were he's an amazing guy who's been screwed, or he's a complete psychopath, right? But when you have a murder mystery like that, you should look at the body. And they didn't look at the body. So I want to talk now about the evidence of innocence, because what happened with serial was it brought us the resources that helped us find the evidence of innocence. And one of those things was the body, the autopsy. Now, if you remember, the timeline of the murder was this, that Hay left school around 2 o'clock. The state says she's dead by 2:36. According to their state's witness, she's been buried by around 7:30 p.m. that night, okay? She was left dumped in the grave, kind of contorted. Her body was on its side, but slightly facing forward, with one arm behind her back, one arm like raised like this, under her head. It's hard to describe, but she was not laid out flat, let's just say it like that. But here's what the autopsy showed. The autopsy showed something called full frontal lividity. Now, when a person dies, if you die on your back, and your body just lays there for 7-8 hours, all the blood will pool to the bottom of your body. And the bottom of your body, if they lift you, if they turn you over, is going to be purple, smooth and purple, all the way down. That's lividity. That's your blood pooling. And medical examiners can tell if somebody's body has been turned, like somewhere in that first 8 hours. Because after 8 hours, you can turn the body however you want, 8 to 10 hours, the blood won't move. But if the body's been turned before it fixes, then they'll see the blood was over here, then it kind of shifted here, then it kind of shifted. They can actually tell how the body's been moved. What Hay had was full frontal lividity, meaning all of the blood was pooled on the very front of her in a very smooth, uninterrupted pattern. So when Hayman Lee was killed, that means she was lying flat on her face for 10 to 12 hours, during which time the lividity fixed. She was never moved for 8 to 10 to 12 hours. And then she was dumped in Lincoln Park. That autopsy report alone is evidence of innocence. That autopsy report alone shows that the state got everything wrong about how and when she was killed. Hayman Lee was not left in that park at 7 p.m. She couldn't have. If she had been left at that park at 7 p.m., her lividity would have been in this arm, on this side of her thing, on part of this torso. It would have been all over. It wouldn't have been like she had been lying flat on her face for 10 hours straight and then moved. Now, she could have been moved later that night. She could have been moved 2 days later. That we'll never know. We might, but that we don't know is what I'm trying to say. Then you have the witness, Jay Wiles. And so the question is this, and in all these years I thought, well, if Adnan didn't do it, he says he didn't do it. I always asked him about Jay, he's like, and Adnan was always confused. He's like, I don't think Jay had anything to do with it. Why would Jay kill her? I don't know why he's saying these things. We didn't know why either. And Jay's statement, not just during the trial, but even in the police statements he gave before the trial, changed about 8 times. We had a spreadsheet that was about 60 pages thick, about this big, that tracked the number of changes in Jay's stories. And if you remember in Serial, Sarah Koenig says, trying to track Jay's stories is like trying to track somebody's dream. She says something like that, right? But the thing is, the problem is this, it wasn't Jay's dream. It was the police officer's dream. What we discovered was this, and Susan Simpson pieced this together. She took a timeline of Jay's statements and when they changed, and then she took a timeline of the police investigation. Every time the police found something new, Jay's statement would change to accommodate this new evidence. Then the police would find, for example, in the first interview, what did you do with her purse? We threw it in the car. We threw it in the woods. Uh-oh, the police just found the purse in the trunk of her car. What did you do with the purse? We put it in the trunk of her car. Like, this is the way the statements kept changing and changing and changing. At one point, he says, before I dropped him off track practice, we went to this park, another park, like 10 miles away. We smoked joints, just randomly. And then we went back. Why did that happen? And then that park story disappeared. Why? Because the police had the phone records. And what they had done was taken the cell tower that pinged, and they had put it in the wrong place on the map. Their original police map showed the tower here when it was actually here. And suddenly Jay had to make a story that said, oh, we were over here. But then when they fixed the map, the story disappears. So now we know that what Jay was doing was what happens in a lot of wrongful convictions, and that is he had become a witness who was coerced into giving statements to support the police's case. And then 3 years ago, Jay's attorney, who defended him at the time, emailed me. And she said this is what happened. She said she had walked into a room where Jay Wiles was sitting. He's a young black man, 19 years old, in Baltimore in the 1990s when things are not very good for young black men. And the prosecutor said to him, I'm going to charge you with a murder, and I'm going to charge you in the county. because Baltimore County is white, and I'm going to ask for the death penalty. So your choice is you become a state's witness, or you're going to get executed for this crime. And so she helped negotiate a plea deal in which Jay agreed to give testimony against Adnan in exchange for basically a complete immunity. He never spent a day in prison, even though, according to his own testimony, he said he helped bury the body. So Jay is now also, like, kind of the case is solved when it comes to Jay. Well, we have all this new evidence. We have the alibi witness back in the story. We have Jay Wiles. He continues to give new statements that keep changing. And we were able then in the last couple of years to get Adnan's conviction overturned twice. One court said, well, we're going to throw this conviction out because his attorney didn't fulfill her duty because she did not basically do a good job interrogating the experts on the cell phone tower evidence. The next court, the state appealed it. The state filed an appeal. We said, okay, that'll be another year and a half of his life. We win the next appeal. And the court said, we're throwing out his conviction because his lawyer didn't contact the alibi witness. And the state appealed again. And so now we are in our third appeal. We just had the hearing in November. This is the highest court in Maryland right now. That's where we are. And he will probably win one more time. I actually think Adnan's going to come home this year. Because if he wins one more time, the state has only they have a couple of options. Number one, they can take him to trial. Number two, they can try to go to the US Supreme Court, which is highly unlikely, which would never take this case. And number three, they can offer him a plea deal or other terms to just release him. Now, we are prepared for a trial if we need to. I just don't know how they would go back to trial with this autopsy report, with the cell tower evidence, with what we know about Jay, and with a lot of other evidence, by the way, that has been discovered by a new team of investigators that for the last 3 years have been investigating this case and are going to tell that story in a new documentary series that's going to air on HBO in a month. So, this story went from a local Baltimore state crime. You know, the prosecutor in one of the interviews, or when he spoke to the serial folks, said this was just like an average homicide case. And it was. And that actually should terrify you. That doesn't mean it was okay what happened. It just means in an average homicide case, what can go wrong for somebody, when it goes wrong, everything goes wrong, right? Because if you think about what happened in Adnan's case, if his defense counsel was competent, he could have won this trial. If the police did their job ethically and didn't coerce a witness, he probably never would have been charged. Hayes' body, you have a young woman who's been brutally murdered, and a rape kit was taken in 1999. We never understood what happened to the rape kit and why the DNA evidence wasn't tested until we got a copy of the prosecutor's file years later. And on the top of the file it said, hold the testing, do not test. The prosecutor in the case stopped the medical examiner, or stopped the lab, the city lab, from testing a rape kit. Why? Because they don't want to mess up this prosecution. They don't want to get a result back that's suddenly going to say, we made this arrest, we announced it on TV, and we got it wrong. If one of those actors, the police, the prosecutor, defense counsel, had done their job right, we wouldn't be 20 years out with Adnan, who was 17 then, turning 37 this year. Now, you know, a lot of people ask me, what was so special? It's really odd to me when people ask me the question, why did it become such a phenomenon? Like, well, why is it such a big deal, this case? And Sarah Koenig didn't know it was going to blow up like this. And I think Serial, the first season, has like 800 million downloads. It's insane. Why did this become a story that became a New York Times bestseller? Why is it now an HBO documentary series? Like, what was so amazing about this case? And again, the truth is really nothing. It was an ordinary wrongful conviction. Every wrongful conviction I've worked on since has had almost exactly the same elements, where the police very early on hone in on suspect. They refuse to follow leads, like the hair, like the fingerprints, like the rape kit. It has defense counsel that didn't do their job. It has prosecutors who hid evidence. But what was special about this was the storytelling. That's what set it apart. What Sarah Koenig was able to do, what I realized, and what I realized also was a failure as an advocate all these years. Now, Serial came out in 2014, so from 9/11 to 2014, me and hundreds of American and Muslim activists and advocates had been trying desperately to humanize Muslims in America, in the aftermath and in the ongoing war on terror, saying we are not the enemy. We've been here for 400 years. We are part of your community. We are your doctors. We are your lawyers. We are your shawarma makers. But we kept failing. We failed miserably because every single year the polling showed that anti-Muslim sentiment grew in this country. We were better off right after 9/11 than we are today. Today we have Muslim bans, and it's okay. Today we have Islamophobia as policy, and it's okay. So why did this happen? And I realized because what we were doing was saying, Islam is a religion of peace. Here, look at this textbook. Here, look at the... We did not tell our stories. We never told our stories as American Muslims. We did not talk about our failures, our vulnerabilities, our hopes, our dreams, our successes. We just said, this is what the religion says. Look at the book. Here's the scripture. This is the 1,500 years ago. People don't care. What Sarah Koenig did was she told the story of an American Muslim man who, if people saw him walking down the street today, would probably be scared of Adnan, even though he's like a gentle giant. Why? Because he wears that Muslim skull cap that's very common in prisons, and he has a beard, and he is not a sympathetic looking guy at all. You know, to the Western imagination, he's not. And his advocate is a woman like me who wears a scarf, and his mother wears a scarf, and his dad looks like Father Time with a beard this long. There's not a single one of us that are sympathetic looking. Well, what Sarah Kane was able to do was humanize us through her power of storytelling. And I realized why we had gotten it wrong so many years. Our advocacy was failing on that issue. The other thing Sarah Koenig taught me was this. You don't need the mainstream media anymore to tell your story. You can control your narrative. I did it with my blog. I did it using social media. And then I did it with the podcast Undisclosed. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I have literally no idea how much time I have, so I want to not.
So it's 7:37. Typically start the Q&A around 7:30. You can go ahead.
Oh, I'm way over. I'm way over. I did not know. If anybody tried to signal me to shut up, I'm sorry. So I want to talk a little bit about Undisclosed, and I'll stop there then, and we'll do Q&A. Those two lawyers I mentioned earlier, Susan Simpson and Colin Miller, whose blogs I began reading, had written over the course of 5 or 6 months hundreds of pages of blogs about Adnan's case and brought to light all the things that I didn't understand. And when Serial ended, somebody came to us and said, nobody's going to read your blogs. Nobody's reading 40 pages on cell phone sites. Turn it into a podcast. Now I'm going to say for the folks who've listened to Serial, and I've had people come up to me and say, I've listened to Serial 5 times, so I totally know what's happening in this case. I'm like, no, you don't. Just listen to the first 3 episodes of Undisclosed, and you will also, by the way, realize how we suck at storytelling, but we're good lawyers. But you're going to hear things that are going to shock you, including audio of Jay being coached by the police in real time. So Undisclosed happened. We did 40 episodes of Adnan's case. That's how granular we went into the evidence and the legal procedures in this case. And then we were flooded with requests from innocence projects, from defendants, from lawyers saying, I have a person who's been in prison 18 years. I have a person who's been in prison 28 years. I have a person, we have hit a wall. Can you help us? So since then, we've done about 12 or 13 cases. We've been able, it's frustrating. It takes an average of 18 years to exonerate a person. It takes money, resources, investigators. It takes a lot of effort. And so that's been like kind of a bulk of the work. And in about half the cases, we have been able to help either get them back in court or actually get them out. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's going to be an HBO series that's going to air in about a month. Another reason I'm in this area, in 2 days I'll be presenting at the TV Critics Association conference on an HBO panel with the director and others about this series. So I hope you watch the series, because Adnan's story is not over. He is still in prison. He's still in prison. He was denied bail again because the state won't stop appealing. And so I'm going to end my talk as I began, that Adnan, like many, many others, tens of thousands of people, is innocent. And I hope that you continue to follow his story until he's home. Thank you. Sorry.
We now have time for questions. Few pointers before we begin. Please raise your hand. One of us will bring a mic to you. Please stand up when you ask your question, and priority will have to go to students. I do have to add that please try to keep your questions as concise as possible so that we can get to as many people. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to thank you for coming and sharing Anad's story. I was wondering if Heyman Lee's family has been involved in any such way in this investigation or still in the case, and whether they believe his innocence.
Yeah, Sarah Koenig tried very hard to contact her family and wasn't able to locate them. When Adnan got a second post-conviction hearing, which he won, and his conviction was thrown out, the prosecutor in that case did a press conference and said, I have a statement from the family. And the statement did not support Adnan. The statement said basically that this is kind of reopening old wounds, and we, basically believe this man belongs in prison. And that highlights another issue in the criminal justice system, which is that often victims' families and defendants' families are pitted against each other. And in other countries, they actually have kind of mechanisms where there are like advocacy organizations that will kind of help the parties not be pitted against one another, like victims' rights organizations and stuff. And I wish I could sit down with just a member of the family or the member of the community and say, don't you think this girl's death deserves another look? Don't you think that rape kit should be tested? Don't you think the person who the hair belongs to should be identified to do this right? So we have had no contact with them, and it would be highly unethical for me to go look for them, frankly, but I have always issued an open invitation that I would sit down with them. Our investigators, our lawyers would sit down with them anytime.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So I have two questions. The first one being, do you think the refusal of the police and investigators at the time ruined the chances of finding the real killer? And two, how has serial personally affected your life?
So yeah, this is one of the most difficult issues that an investigator or lawyer faces when they have like a 20-year-old wrongful conviction or a 15-year-old, is finding that evidence from all that time ago. Witnesses have died, evidence gets lost, right? We were told in Adnan's case the DNA evidence was lost in a warehouse somewhere. It's not always true. Sometimes it's there. And the other thing people don't understand is that we don't have state subpoena power. I'm not a police officer that can force somebody, I can bring him into custody and force an interview. I'm not a prosecutor that I can issue a subpoena. People say it's not just about getting Adnan out, it's about finding the right person. But I don't have the state power to do that. That is a responsibility of the state. So definitely, the police dropped the ball, and it's not just that Adnan didn't get justice, Hay also didn't get justice. As for the other thing, how does serial affect my life? Well, I have a completely different career. I'm a podcaster now, and 4 years ago, I didn't know what a podcast was. There's that. I worked in national security policy for 6 years, and I made the decision that I'm not gonna work in policy anymore because the impact was too low. And so I focused the bulk of my work on wrongful conviction, which I never was an advocate. I give credit to the people who've been doing this for decades. There are people who've been working on these issues for decades. I only was in it for Adnan. That's the honest truth. Now, however, I am very interested in these issues, in criminal justice reform. And I do still keep a leg in the work in the field of immigration because it's very important to me. I'm a supervisory attorney at a firm that handles mostly asylum cases, especially given the current political climate. So, it's impacted my career almost completely in that way. For the worse, I don't know. I don't think there's been anything that bad come out of it. I think it's all been good. I believe in following opportunities. Other than, I don't like to travel a lot, so I'm traveling more. If I could just haul all my children with me, it would be good, but that doesn't work out. But that's about it.
Hi. So you mentioned, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You mentioned sort of the tediousness of and your frustration with sort of the legal system in general. I mean, the appeals court not being able to bring in new evidence.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you have thought about or had any conversations with other people about just comprehensive legal reform.
Yeah, to me as somebody who worked in a policy and advocacy space, I do think about those issues a lot. Well, how do you make the changes, right? And that's a question we get a lot about, well, what can be done to fix the system? And the problem is, what I realize is that a lot of times we wait for legislation to fix the system, and it can work, but it can also never happen, and a lot of times it just never happens. I think the most effective way to reform, for any kind of reform on these issues, that you have to have a whole different animal, a whole different kind of person in the prosecutor's office. We've seen this in about 3 different jurisdictions around the country now, in Houston, in Philadelphia, and in one district in New York. where the new district attorneys there are not career prosecutors. They are criminal defense attorneys who, for 20, 30 years, practiced criminal defense law, saw how their defendants have been treated, sued the police plenty of times, worked on civil rights stuff, and said, enough is enough. I'm gonna go take charge of the house that's doing this to this community. Larry Krasner is a phenomenal example out of Philadelphia. He was a career civil rights and criminal defense attorney. He said, forget it, I'm running for DA in a jurisdiction that is historically corrupt, historically corrupt. He won. And within 6 months, he turned that office around. He fired prosecutors who committed Brady violations, which is when a prosecutor withholds evidence of innocence, actually sits on evidence. He fired those prosecutors. He made a list of 26 cops. He said, these cops will never testify in a case that I prosecute ever again. So, because he knew they were dirty cops. So now their arrests are useless, right? He said, I'm not gonna charge marijuana offenses anymore. He said, for the prosecutors that are in my office, if you're gonna ask for 20 years for like a drug offense, you have to show me how much every year is gonna cost the city and how many teachers we could hire instead and what the city could do with that money instead. You have to account for every dollar you want us to spend to incarcerate this person. That's the power of one DA, and that's what it's about. It's about electing the right people in office who will make the change and clean house. The problem is, prosecutors are career prosecutors. They move on to become judges, even ones who commit Brady violations. How many people here watch Making a Murderer? Do you guys remember the attorney who represented that young, mentally, I don't want to call him incompetent, but Brendan Dassey was intellectually, obviously, affected. This guy, the attorney who represented him was so incompetent that he set his own client up to give a confession. He set this young 16-year-old boy with a low IQ up to give his own confession. That guy today is a judge, and that's what happened. So you just need better people in those offices, and that's about electing. That's just the power of the vote. Find a criminal defense attorney in your jurisdiction, be like, well, you've been doing this for 20 years, run for DA. Run for DA, get on the other side of that power. There's a question.
Hi, thank you for your talk. My name is Khadija, and I've experienced direct instances of Islamophobia. And you briefly mentioned Muslim Americans learning how to tell their story. Do you have any suggestions for how to tell that story?
Yeah, I am heartened to see kind of a emergence of American Muslim comedians and artists and people that we have not seen in those spaces. Athletes on a national level, Olympians and all those things. You have to use the tools at your disposal, obviously. I think art is a wonderful way. I think filmmaking is a wonderful way. I think social media, anybody can pop anything on YouTube. But I also think there's a time and place, and I think this is the time and place, for American Muslims who want to change the narrative to stop talking about Islam and Muslims. Part of the problem is the only time we're in the limelight is when we're being asked to respond to an act of terrorism. Every time there's an act of terrorism, any part of the world, Paris, wherever, they'll call one of us and say, do you have anything to say? What am I supposed to say? I'm a Pakistani American. I don't know what happened in Egypt. I don't know what you want from me, right? Stop being that person and say, I'm actually here to talk about climate change. I'm here to talk about wrongfully convicted people. I don't care what their background is. I'm here to talk about fitness. I'm here to, representing ourselves in other capacities so people understand we are doing all kinds of things in this country. We're not just here connected only to our identity, as Muslims. So I think those things are important. I want to turn on TV, and when I see a Muslim on a news panel, I want it to be not about terrorism. I want it to be because they're there to talk about, I don't know, raising pets or whatever, My dad's a veterinarian, I don't know. Just anything, talk about anything but terrorism. I think that's one way to do it.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. As someone who enjoys watching true crime documentaries or podcasts like Serial, I always wondered, it seems like there's a very thin line between making a sensation out of a very tragic story and making the story convincing enough, like you said, and that could give you a lot of power. And as someone who's been in the shoes of the families or friends of someone who's wrongfully convicted, and also as a storyteller now, how do you think Serial, what do you think Serial did well in that storytelling, and what do you think went differently in that process of storytelling that could have been, I guess, more respectful for the family members, both the defendants and the victims, and for the process? Thank you.
So, you know, one of the things Serial did incredibly well, they are professional storytellers, was to hook people in with the kind of sustained ambivalence, the mystery every week of did he do it, did he not. Earlier tonight, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, this lady over here told me, yeah, I mean, it said that, you know, she was hooked from the very first line, the way they framed it. Do you remember what you did 6 weeks ago? Right, remember that? Do you remember what you did 6 weeks ago? Now, the interesting thing about that, you talk about what they could have done better, was to actually be accurate. The problem with that framing, which served us to the extent that it hooked people, was that it was not accurate. It wasn't that Adnan didn't remember what he did 6 weeks ago, it's that he couldn't prove it. In the police files and in the defense files that Sarah Koenig had, that I had given to her, on at least three different occasions, Adnan has written down what he did after school that day, what his schedule was. It's not that he didn't remember, he just couldn't prove it. What he couldn't say for sure was, he's like, I was definitely on the school campus that day. He couldn't tell you if he was in that hallway or that, but he's like, I was there. And I went to track practice that day, I remember that. It was Ramadan, he's like, I was fasting. He led prayers the next day. It wasn't that, so the problem, even though it was a great way to hook people, it was a great tool, narrative tool, which actually wasn't accurate. So for me, like that was kind of my beef with Serial. It's just not getting things completely right. And I think sometimes they did that for the narrative value. And also because they tried harder than they needed to not be biased, right? But I also wonder about that when it comes to journalism and storytelling. I mean, is it an obligation not to be biased? Don't we sometimes have to take a side, right? And I think there's lots of journalists who have taken sides, and very courageously so, on lots of different issues, and been right about it. So that's what they could have done a little bit better, I think, is just gotten some of the stuff right. Obviously, you know, doing the coverage of the autopsy. One of the things they didn't do, and they probably weren't, and a lot of people criticized them for this, and I didn't agree with the criticism, was that they didn't cover the issue of being an American Muslim very well, like in terms of our traditions and how the community operated and the kinds of, you know, the double life issue, all these things. I just don't think they were equipped to do that, right? They did not understand our community. And I'm kind of glad they didn't try to do that, because they probably would not have done it well. So that was a criticism of, you know, and I'm forever going to be grateful to Sarah Koenig. There was also, I remember, a piece written about, you know, Sarah Koenig as kind of like this great white hope walking in and taking over this story about this community. And my response to that piece was, well, we were waiting for the great brown hope, it didn't show up. So I will take hope in every color. I don't care. Like, that's not my issue. My issue was just getting the reporting right.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm wondering if you have an idea about why so many prosecutors and cops are systematically, trying to coerce witnesses or push the ruling in one way. I'm wondering if you think that's purely an issue of racism, Islamophobia, et cetera, or is there something else to it? Is this just like a larger issue that affects, like every race? And I'm also wondering how Adnan is doing, having suffered 20 years of injustice, and if he's has been able to maintain his sanity through the process.
Look, there's no question anybody who understands and really has looked at the studies and research around criminal justice, sentencing, conviction, charging, that people of color are disproportionately charged than white people. They just are. They have 10% longer sentences. They are charged for things that are crimes in their neighborhoods, but not crimes in other neighborhoods. I'll give you an example. In downtown Baltimore, loitering is a crime. You hang out on the corner a little too long, you can go to you can be arrested for that. That's not going to happen to you in the suburbs where I live, right? So we have, and this is systematic, we have criminalized behavior that's particular to certain communities that we know is only going to impact a certain community. I was part of a conversation, actually, I do a lot of Jewish-Muslim interfaith work, and some of the things we're trying to do is bolster hate crime laws against Jews and Muslims in America, especially in the last couple of years, by enacting a domestic terrorism statute. The problem is this: terrorism under the law is only terrorism if it is inspired by foreign actors or committed by a foreign actor. The law is set up so that a person who is a white nationalist can do the exact same thing that like a brown person from overseas or somebody who's inspired by people overseas does as a Muslim, but not be charged with terrorism. He's just not going to get the charge. So when you have laws that are set up in a way that impact one community or other, you have issues. Having said that, when it comes to prosecutors, and so those things have to be addressed and changed. But when you have prosecutors and cops, I have to say this because I don't want to make it seem like I'm vilifying all of them. There are wonderful ethical prosecutors. There are great people who are cops every day who put their life on the line. What happens often is this: there will be a couple of bad apples. But the problem is everybody else looks away. Others know it. Others know it. In Baltimore just a couple years ago, this entire task force was known to plant evidence and like steal drug money from busts that they took. Like everybody knew it, but nobody said anything, right? So the problem is complicity. But you know what? And I was telling some students earlier today that California is the only state in the entire country that has finally made it a crime for a prosecutor to withhold evidence of innocence. In every other state, a prosecutor can have a videotape of somebody else committing the crime and sit on that evidence and not be prosecuted for it. So California is the only state that's made it a felony, but here's the problem. Nobody's been prosecuted under that law. What prosecutor is going to charge another prosecutor? What cop is going to arrest another cop? These are the problems that we encounter, this band of brothership type of thing where the system protects itself. And once again, to me, the best answer is to get in people who are from outside the system who don't give a crap about those loyalties, who are just there to clean house. And they're the ones who can kind of shake things up.
Oh, and finally, how is Adnan?
Oh, yes,
that
how
was
is
her
Adnan?
second question. Yeah.
Adnan is well. Adnan is always better than the rest of us. Because Adnan, like almost every other wrongfully convicted person I've worked with who has been incarcerated, he's been in a supermax facility for 9 years, since 2009, excuse me. Yeah, 9-10 years now. But you know, anybody who has life sentences, like when people listen to him, they're like, he is way too calm, he must be a psychopath. You have to understand, when you have been incarcerated for life, you have to come to terms with it. You have to create a life. You have to find some center. You cannot 20 years later be raging. You have to find some forgiveness and, you know, some clarity about, okay, well, maybe this is what my life is going to be like. And what Adnan says to me today is this. Every time the state files an appeal, I'm like, I want to burn something down. And he says to me, you know what, Rabia? He's like, 5 years ago, I had come to terms with I'm going to die in prison. I'm not going to leave I'm not going to leave this prison until I'm dead. He's like, now I have a ray of hope. So that's all he wants, is that the little bit of hope. And I'm sorry, even after all these years, I'm tired of the fight, you know? But he's generally doing well. And he doesn't even have the kind of same rage and hate that I do for like everybody involved. Like I want to get everybody disbarred and arrested. And I might. But he's well. And he spends most of his time asking, how are you doing? He's like, I'm good, I'm okay, don't worry about me. So anyhow, thank you for that question. And sorry for the tears. It's been a long day.
Thank you for sharing your story as well as Adnan's story. Please join me in thanking Ms. Rabia Chaudry.